Good evening, everyone. I asked at the beginning, I'll ask again. If people sitting further back want to move forward, it would look nice. But also, if you want to ask questions, we're not going to have a roving mic. So the closer you are, the more likely you are that the question will be heard. So that's also a good reason. So I'm going to ask if people can move forward that are sitting further back, unless you're too exhausted and don't want to move, or you'd rather not move. That's also fine, just for the visual. Okay. Thank you for coming. I know some of you will have been here for the previous two lectures of this series as well on Ben Gurion and Moshe Sharet. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Centre, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here for our third lecture in the Mr. Prime Minister series. First of all, I'm going to urge you to mark down in your calendar the next instalment of this series, which is lecture on Golda Meir on the 8th of March, when we will temporarily not be Mr. Prime Minister, but Madam Prime Minister in the series, but for one lecture only. We're normally with the first Sunday of the month. Next month with the second Sunday, the 8th of March, because it's the Yahrzeit of Menachem Begin at the beginning of the month. As usual, you'll get to look online via our English website, or by calling us on 02-565-2011, and those tickets should be available already later this week. Now, to this evening's lecture. Because we've only reached number 3 in this tour of Israel's leaders, we're still very much in the era of the men and women who built the state. And Levi Eshkol, before he became Prime Minister, was an absolutely critical figure, as we'll hear, in developing Israel's infrastructure and economy. And he was also, of course, Prime Minister during the most dramatic and extraordinary and consequential 6 days in the history of the state. He's a man deserving of our admiration and appreciation, and we're very happy to have with us today someone to help us understand more about him and his prime ministership. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ami Gluska, who is a lecturer of history and political science. He was a recent rank of colonel in the IDF and was also private secretary, speechwriter, and spokesman for Israeli Presidents Yitzhak Rabin and Chaim Herzog. He's also served in diplomatic capacities on behalf of the IDF and the Foreign Ministry, and was a member of the negotiating team of the Palestinians at the Taba Conference in 2000-2001. He's held senior positions in the Ministries of Defense and Public Security, and was the author of the award-winning book, in English it's called The Israeli Military and the Origins of 1967 War, Government, Armed Forces and Defense Policy. In Hebrew, it has a much catchier title. It's just called Eshkol 10 Kudan, which is not just catchier, but also I think very relevant for our topic this evening. So, Dr. Ami Gluska, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. I must admit that this is the first time that I give a lecture in English. My family comes from Yemen. Well, I don't think there were too many good English teachers in Sana'a. But I was born in this country, so during the British mandate, not that I learned then the language. What I mean to say is, I know my accent is a bit misleading because my accent is good, but my English is so-so. So if I find me struggling for a word or a sentence or something, I beg for your forgiveness in advance. Okay. We're talking about the third Prime Minister of Israel, who also served as the Minister of Defense. And he is He's thought to be one of the best prime ministers. But you will see it, you will learn during my lecture. But yes, I think he was outstanding, but he has also some faults. He was born in the Ukraine in 1885, 9 years to the month before Ben-Gurion, who was born in Poland. In 1914, he made Aliyah. 1914, just before the eruption of the First World War. He was a tall, handsome, and very strong lad. And he went to work in the Moshavot, the agricultural settlements of the time. And he cherished, most of all, he said, in retrospect, that of all the compliments that he had during his long career, he cherished most the title King of the Whole, because he was so good at it. Shlomo Tzemach is an author, a very close companion to Ben-Gurion. They actually came together. Two very close friends, the same place in Poland. But he turned to writing, while Ben-Gurion turned to politics. And he, in an interview, said a few words that I will read to you. He said so: there are some exceptional virtues, combination of which in one person is uncommon. And it is that unique combination that makes Eshkol an extraordinary person. If you ask me in what exactly I find his greatness, I should answer that it is not greatness that I find in him, but wisdom, peace of mind, stability, and ability to lead in the right way and get things done. Eshkol was a very wise man. He had good spirit, wonderful sense of humor, Jewish humor, Yiddish actually, patience, persistence, and he was master of the art of politics and negotiation. He used to say, while negotiating, I compromise and compromise and compromise until I get exactly what I want. During the First World War, like Ben-Gurion, he joined the Jewish battalion. In 1920, he was among a group of young chalutzim, pioneers, who built kibbutz Begania Bet near the Kinneret Lake. In 1930, as the delegate of Hapoel HaTzair, a moderate social and democrat movement, Eshkol took part in bringing his movement together with Ben-Gurion's socialist Poalei Zion party to form the Mapai party that would reign and lead the Zionist movement in the state of Israel for almost 4.5 decades. In 1937, Eshkol was the central figure in the establishing of Mekorot Water Company, a joint venture of the Histadrut, the Jewish agency, and Keren Hayesod, Keren Kayemet Israel, sorry. He went on to become the head of the Department of Hityashvut, settlement in the Jewish agency, and in 1946 he initiated successful establishment of the 11 points in the Negev, in defiance of the British Mandate land laws. Eshkol gradually became prominent in the ranks of the party, the Istadrut, the Haganah, paramilitary underground organization, and a number of, during the short period of cooperation between the three underground bodies, Haganah, subordinated to the Shul legal authorities, Etzel, with precarious affiliation to the Revisionist Party, and Levi, independent and radical. Eshkol was a member of a clandestine committee that directed the anti-government operations. During 1948-49 Independence War, Eshkol served as Director General of the Ministry of Defense and Deputy Minister of Defense for Financial Affairs, the military production and procurement. And that's all I have on this page. We'll get to, okay, so let's begin to see what we have. Okay, so just look at the map. Look at the map. Because I want you to bear in mind the borders of Israel as they were between 1949 and 1967. Israel was under threat with very, very long and hostile, all hostile boundaries, and that affected the agenda of every prime minister and defense minister as Eshkol was. You have some magic? Hold.
Bring it.
Ah, okay. Okay. So we will talk about the third prime minister. Of course, I want to begin with the background of his becoming prime minister. The spring 1963, this is the twilight time of Ben-Gurion, and there are all sorts of problems, security problems, that the country faces at that point of time. And one of them was in April, 17th of April 1963, when the three leaders of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, were known as the leader of the Arab, the great leader of the Arab countries. Egypt, of course, Egypt's president, and his counterparts in Syria and Iraq. They met and they signed an agreement of unity, calling on all other Arab countries to join together with the aim of liberating Palestine. The Ben-Gurion, that was the nightmare of Ben-Gurion. I mean, the idea of the Pan-Arabism, that is, that the Arabs will unite one day the most vocal voice for uniting the Arab world was, of course, Abdel Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. And that nightmare, he knew that Israel, with its borders, as you've seen, and with a small population, starting, of course, with 650,000 in the beginning, and then, of course, with the mass immigration from Europe, remnants of the Shoah, and Jews from Yemen and from Iraq and from North Africa, became a nation of 1 million, 1 million and a half, surrounded with a giant Arab population. The country, Israel, had no resources, I mean, natural resources, which were in abundance to the Arabs. And Israel was alone. It didn't have any ally. Its relationship in the mid-50s was a short time, a moment, a golden moment with France, which culminated with the Sinai campaign, but I don't want to go into it. It's not part of the lecture. But that was the point when he felt that it's very, very possible that this unity will face Israel with the danger of annihilation. And he sent private letters to more than 40 heads of state. Most of them, of course, most importantly, his letter to John Kennedy, where he begged that America, together with Russia, will vouch, guarantee that no change by force, no change of borders, territories, will be allowed. He wanted to see President Kennedy, and Kennedy wouldn't accept it. Ben-Gurion had anticipated that situation years before. And that is why he decided, and it was his decision alone, not a decision, or democratic decision taken by the government, or even a small group of ministers together with the Prime Minister, to go nuclear. That is, to exploit the opportunity of as I said, the golden moment with France, to establish, to acquire a reactor, an atomic reactor that was built in the Negev. And of course, it was under secrecy. And at that point of time, in 1963, the program has not yet reached fruition. That is to say that we didn't have a bomb, something even close to a bomb, in 1963. How it led to the rise to power of Eshkol, I will explain. Okay, these are the, you can read, of course, the three people who were actually, the fourth is responsible for the construction of the ground. But those who led the project is, of course, Ben-Gurion and Shimon Peres, who was a champion of the relations with France, and Professor Bergman as a science consultant. Now, yes, it's a funny, I know it's a funny picture. In 1957, exactly a year after the Sinai campaign, it was still the golden moment of the relations with France. Shimon Peres signed an agreement with the government of the French government, and that meant that France would sell to Israel a reactor. France, at that time, did not have the bomb yet. It was actually, as a result of the Sinai campaign, they felt they were stabbed in the back by the United States, by President Eisenhower, who forced Britain and France to stop and withdraw their forces, whose aim was to take over the canal, the Suez Canal, after Gamal Abdel Nasser had nationalized. And but it was all very, very secret. So from 1957 until 1960, it was disguised as a new factory, textile factory in the Negev, strange place, secluded, not far from Beersheba. But what happened is a transition in France. De Gaulle became initially Prime Minister and later President of France. And he decided, it was in May 1960, to sever to cut off the assistance and the French assistance to Israel with this project. And the announcement was shocking for Ben-Gurion because it had already been under construction for 2 or 3 years. And he asked to see de Gaulle. This is a picture of their meeting in May 1960. And he reached an agreement, not a very easy one, but de Gaulle agreed to continue respect the agreement with Israel of the building the nuclear infrastructure, but he said that he had Ben-Gurion must first put aside the veil of secrecy over the reactor and publicly vow that this project is meant for peaceful purposes only. Of course, Ben-Gurion could not object, so he just asked de Gaulle. He said, "Okay, I will do that, but please bear with me for a few months. Before the end of the year, I will do what you ask of me." Okay, de Gaulle asked why. He said, "I have my reason." Okay. And indeed, in December 1960, okay, this is in Hebrew, but it's, at the time, Ma'ariv newspaper was the most read newspaper in the country, and the most important one. And you see the headlines. The headline is Ben-Gurion announced at the Knesset actually, an atomic reactor is under construction in the Negev. And of course, this said that it was meant for the development of the Negev and for energy, for research. Israel doesn't have natural resources, unlike the Arabs, and we want to settle the Negev. We need water, we need energy, and that's the purpose. And he even promised that when construction is finished in 2 or 3 years, he said that we will invite students to come from every country, to study, I mean, he made it as if it was completely peaceful, and that was his promise to de Gaulle, and it saved the project. But we now, why did he ask for doing it at the end of the year? It was because he calculated that the right timing for this announcement would be when after the general elections in the States, during the transitional period, when the outgoing president, that was, of course, Eisenhower, is a lame duck, and the new president, Kennedy, the elected president-elect, still not taken the oath. So he thought that would be more convenient timing to announce it. Of course, it didn't have much, and Kennedy was immediately after his inauguration, well, not immediately, he had, of course, the Bay of Pigs, and he had things on his mind. But anyway, he wanted, he sent a message to Ben Gurion to inquire what, and raised this question about the nuclear infrastructure, the Israeli infrastructure. And Ben Gurion asked to see him, to meet with the new president. And the answer was, not before American inspectors are allowed to go to the site, come to the site, and see and check and verify that there's nothing suspicious. And Ben Gurion allowed it. In any case, it was only under construction and no problem. And then, of course, the inspectors came, and they said that they couldn't find any reason for suspicion. But of course, it is on an early stage of constructing, and we have to check from time to time. Okay. Ben Gurion and Kennedy met, not in the White House, out of Astoria, New York. The matter of the Dimona came up, and Ben Gurion said what I said in the Knesset, what I announced and promised. I can assure you that you believe me, and this is only for good purposes. He added, of course, if things change in the Middle East, and we'll have to see what's happening in the area of the Middle East, but I can assure you that we have no other purposes rather than peaceful. Okay. Kennedy became, he became very suspicious later on, especially after the Cuban crisis, with the Soviet missile base in Cuba, and a correspondence began. Initially, it was polite, but he wanted more assurances, because his intelligence services were telling that there is a reason to really suspect whether Ben Gurion said the truth. What you see, of course, is 1963, November 1963, a U-2 photograph of the site of Dimona. But before that, there's an exchange of messages where actually Kennedy puts an ultimatum to the group. As I say, it started politely and it reached a stage where he demanded unequivocally that there must be a regular inspection of the site of Dimona, allowing the inspectors, either international or American, to come to the site to check every corner, everything, and to stay as long as necessary, once every 6 months. Now, Ben Gurion had a problem, of course, a very serious problem with that. And his answers to Kennedy were, we are an independent country. We are friends of the United States. We're part of the free world. I made a promise, I made a pledge. And you should respect it. You had nothing to do with building the construction of the reactor. And we made promises also to the French. And I can agree once a year a visit of American scientists. But no more than that. And he didn't say that, but I mean, he meant that it would not be, that you can come and check. We are a sovereign country, and this is not the way to deal with a friendly state. I'm saying all this because the man who saved the reactor was actually Eshkol, and you will understand it in a minute. Okay. On the 16th of June, 1963, Ben Gurion arrives in the morning to his office, and he announces, without explanation, that he was resigning from his position as Prime Minister and Defense Minister. And he nominated Levi Eshkol as his successor. As you can see, he said he will be better than me because he got messages from the people, around the country. Ben Gurion, the great Ben Gurion, were leaving us. We feel like orphans. And he said, you can count on Levi Eshkol. So that's how Eshkol assumes office, and he is Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. This is, of course, as he takes the oath. But of course, very short period, days actually, after he assumes office, a message is sent to him from Kennedy. And this is the message, the original one, that was delivered by ambassador, the American ambassador in Israel, Walworth Barber. Of course, sending nice words to Eshkol on his becoming prime minister, but saying, of course, that it is the matter of Dimona is something good, something which is of the utmost importance. Because as I said, after the crisis in 1962, October 1962, over Cuba, he became very, very adamant on the questions of proliferation of the of nuclear weapons. I would just cite from one of his speeches, enormous speeches, so many speeches on this subject, as if he was dedicated to this matter. He said, the war today or tomorrow, if it led to nuclear war, would not be like any war in history. A full-scale nuclear exchange lasting less than 60 minutes, where the weapons now in existence would wipe out more than 300 million Americans, Europeans, and Russians, as well as untold number elsewhere. And the survivors would inherit a world so devastated by explosives and poison and fire that today we cannot even conceive of its horror. I ask you to stop and think for a moment what it would be, what it would mean to have nuclear weapons in so many hands, in the hands of countries large and small, stable and unstable, responsible and irresponsible, scattered throughout the world. There would be no rest for anyone then, no stability, no real security, no chance of effective disarmament. So he was very, 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 very blunt about it. Now, of course, the problem is now put on the table of the new Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol. Levi Eshkol is a wise man. In his first months in office, he follows Ben-Gurion very, very carefully. A few months later, in the spring of '64, he started to rid himself from this burden of Ben-Gurion legacy. But right now, what he said, he, of course, consulted with Ben-Gurion how to answer this message. And prepared the answer, which was actually more or less what Ben-Gurion would have written. And then he invited the ambassador, the American ambassador, Barbour, to his office and handed him the message. But he added an oral message. He said, listen, this is my official answer to your president. But I want you to assure your president that we will reach an agreement. I understand his concerns, and we'll find a way to satisfy his wishes. And Kennedy grabs this promise, verbal message of Eshkol, and he answers with a very, very warm letter, saying, with your wisdom, you will have strengthened the bond between the United States and Israel economically, and we will guarantee your security, and we will do what we can to help you, to help your country. So, just to hold the Prime Minister by his word, and he added, he said, and I invite you to send a delegation of senior officers, security, army people, to the first dialogue, strategic dialogue in the Pentagon. That was actually the first time in the history of the relation between Israel and the United States. And that, okay. Okay, now, in the first half of November, a delegation of senior officers headed by the Chief of Staff to be, Chief of Staff in waiting, Yitzhak Rabin, and the head of the intelligence, Ron Yariv, should have been a picture showing them, headed the delegation that went to the Pentagon and discussion on the needs, the security needs of Israel and so on. But the real change came after the assassination, of course, of Yes. This also doesn't need any explanation. Okay. Now we have a new president, Lyndon Johnson. And Johnson is a different figure, completely different from JFK. And he has a warm sentiment with the Jewish people. He was a member of a delegation of his congressman in 1945 that at the end of the war went to Europe and visited Auschwitz and visited camps, Bergen-Belsen actually, and were horrified. And also, many donors in the Democrat Party were his friends, and he was encircled actually by Jews. So a warm sentiment. And we will get to it, Richard, in a minute. In the spring of 1964, Levi Eshkol married a young woman. She passed away just 2 years ago, Miriam Zelikovich. And that woman, whom I had the privilege to meet and know her, and she helped me quite a lot. She was a very, very strong character. But not only that, she was also very, very familiar with the politics, because she had been, before that, like for years, the librarian of the Knesset. So he knew all the members of Knesset, and he knew all the shticks and all, every political figure. And it's evident that once he marries her, he deviates from the line of Ben-Gurion. He just spread his wings and do things that were contrary to the legacy of Ben-Gurion. One of them was the Parashat Lavon. The Lavon affair, the origin of which was the shameful affair of the 50s. I don't want to go into it because it will take a lot of time. But it is something that happened in 1954. Israel is a young country, very, very worried because the British government, negotiating with Nasser, the Prime Minister of Egypt at that time, on evacuating the British the army from its bases on the Suez Canal. Israel thought that it would be great danger because they saw the existence of the British army along the Suez Canal as sort of barrier that would not allow the Egyptians to try and attack Israel. The question of who gave the order to a group of youngsters who were recruited. They were actually teenagers, most of them. They were recruited secretly and formed a net of, well, they got some superficial training in sabotage and things like that. And they were ordered to put bombs in cinemas, for instance. It was silly from the beginning. It was amateur. And they all were caught, and 2 of them were hanged, and the rest were sent to a long time in prison. And the question was, who gave the order? It was either the Minister of Defense, who was Pinchas Lavon at the time, and Ben-Gurion retired for a brief period to kibbutz in the Negev, and Moshe Sharet was Prime Minister, and Pinchas Lavon was Minister of Defense. Did he give the order? Or was it the head of the intelligence corps who gave the order? Anyway, the whole country, I'm talking about 60, in 60, 61, 62, 63, so a few years. I mean, it took 3 years who was to blame? And Eshkol wanted to rid the country from this affair. Ben-Gurion was very, very persistent that it should be given to the judiciary to go through it and find and decide who gave the order. And he wants to get rid of this. So, first step was to put all things aside, which irritated Ben Gurion, but it was still silent at this stage. Secondly, he decides to respect the will of Zev Jabotinsky, who was the founder of the revisionist faction or party in the Zionist movement, a very, very bright and a man of thought and a man of original ideas. He was also a poet. He translated some of the most beautiful poems, poetry. And his poems were brought to Israel. Ben Gurion, all his years, didn't want to hear about it. He said, we want to bring to Israel living Jews, not bones. But, okay. Now, his triumph over Ben Gurion will come later, but you can say that this was his great achievement. The achievement of Ben Gurion was never invited formally by an American president to the White House. Eshkol got this invitation, and he met with LBJ, and he formed a very, very cordial relations between the two. I mean, the expression was that they had chemistry because, well, they had farms in Texas, Lyndon Johnson, and they could speak about agriculture and so on and so on. And at that point, in fact, the president raised the question of Dimona. And Eshkol said, promised, Israel will not be the first country in the region in the Middle East to develop nuclear weapon. That I can assure you. And the international expected it, and then the whole, crisis with America, with Kennedy, was now over. And then Ben Gurion started to attack his successor. He's not worthy of becoming prime minister. He fails in everything. And he challenged him in the Mapai conference. And he lost. A 2/3 victory for Eshkol over Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion and his followers actually left the party, Mapai, and formed a new party called the Afro. This is Golda Meir kissing Moshe Sharet, the aide Moshe Sharet. 3 months after that case, he passed away. So this picture is dramatic. And now we have a new problem on our hand, which begins with the inauguration of the water carrier, the national water carrier. Eshkol was the champion. It's actually the one as finance minister drove it forward. But already in 1959, when it was known that Israel plans to take water from the Jordan River and use it for irrigating the Negev, there was a consensus within the Arab leadership that we will not allow the Jews to steal the sacred waters of Palestine after they grabbed the ground of Palestine. But in the beginning of 1964, it was clear that Israel is about to inaugurate, actually activate the carrier. So Nasser called an Arab summit with all the heads of state, all Arab heads of state, and they took some very important decisions. First and foremost is to avoid, to divert the tributaries of the Jordan River. Jordan River gets its water from 3 tributaries. One was originated in Lebanon, the other one in Syria, the third one on the border between Israel and Syria. So their plan was to divert the water so that Israel would not be able actually to foil the Israeli water project. But they also had a resolution to establish the Palestinian entity. A resolution that later led to the creation of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. The initiative came from the Nasser. Okay, you can read. The Americans were quite worried that a war could erupt because of the water issue. In Israel needed tanks, but Jordan also wanted tanks. And 2 very, very high-ranking officials from the United States, Abraham Harriman, one of the very famous diplomats, and Robert Conner, Jewish by origin, of the what do you call it? National Security
Council.
what's the word?
Council.
Council, yes, council. Yeah, sorry. They came to Israel and it was a lengthy and very tough discussion. They stayed here for almost a month and got an agreement. An agreement, as you can see in the picture. Yeah, this is as a result of the Arab summit. You can see on the right side the water carrier, and then on the left side the border with Syria, which was problematic, and there were skirmishes and all sorts of problems, and formation of the PLO and the Fatah, which was not part of the decision, but at the same time, the Fatah was actually a result of the ideas that floated at that time of Che Guevara and liberation, popular liberation movements and wars. That was the beginning. Of course, we will hear of them in years to come. Okay, so you can see the main figures of the army. Yitzhak Rabin, as of January 1st, 1964, is Chief of Staff, and he has maybe the most brilliant staff in record. And he was an outstanding Chief of Staff. He's the deputies and the Chief of Intelligence. But as shown on the previous picture, see, there was a gap of ages. The average age of the members of the General Staff of the Army were youngsters. See, the average age was 42 in comparison to the government, 63. And this is the gap. And as you can see, almost all ministers of the government were born in the diaspora, except one of them. And of course, it was the other way among the generals who led the army, who were people of an Israeli spirit. They grew up in this country. And this had its effect later when a confrontation tension between the moderate government, civil government, and more activist generals of the army.
Sorry, I don't mean any disrespect, but could you please speed up your speech at least by a factor of 2? You're losing us, we're going to sleep. Please speak much faster.
You're speaking for yourself.
I will try. Okay. A step which brings closer the war is for a change of the doctrine. Ben Gurion, his doctrine was the Air Force is not to be activated for the skirmishes and incidents of the border, only for war. And Eshkol changes it. And this, of course, brings the tension. Now, we're starting to suffer from sabotage activities of the Fatah. And, of course, the army, the tension between the army and the government. Because the army says, we need to act severely, drastically against it, because otherwise it will develop into a very, very bad situation. And Eshkol and his ministers were trying not to act directly against the terrorists. They wanted, as Eshkol put it, the book is open and the hand is writing. He meant we don't have to go and react after every incident. Problem was that the incidents accumulated, and it reached a time when you lose of course your popularity, and the public is expecting you to act. And this is an act of reprisal which was directed towards Jordan. And it's very clear that the country behind the terrorist activity was Syria and not Jordan. But since the incident was on the Jordanian border, the decision was taken to react severely. And actually, the IDF attacked a village called Samon, near Hebron, and destroyed 40 houses. And that created mass demonstration within Jordan, the West Bank and the East Bank, that almost toppled the King Hussein regime. So it was a mistake that would later cost us. Yes, and when we reached the year of 1966, there is a deteriorating security situation on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a deep recession. The government actually had to take steps because of the economic situation was such that drastic steps had to be taken. But 1965 was a year, on November of elections, general elections. And the government refrained from taking the necessary step at the time. So in 1966, they took very severe steps in order to rectify the economic situation, but it caused a recession, and the government lost control of the situation. Banks collapsed. Factories were closed. Unemployment rose within a few months from 3.2% to 12%. And there were demonstrations against the government. This is just a project. This is all jokes, Eshkol. And the one that everybody remembered is the last one in Lod is asked to kindly to put the light off because there was a lot of emigration from the country, Yeridah, is called in Hebrew, and no immigration, almost no immigration to the country. And that situation was also a factor in creating the situation of the Six-Day War. Because on the Arab side, the situation in Israel seemed as if the Israelis are just Israelis, just going from bad to worse, and the Arabs can attack, countries weak. They always thought that Israel is not a real nation. It was just people coming from all sorts of countries without anything to unite them together. So that was the situation, and now we reach, as we come closer to the Six-Day War, the situation is such that, as you say in the picture, the army, the IDF, is the darling of the nation. But the government, popularity of the government is the lowest ever. And very famous correspondent at the time, the father of Lapid, his name was Yosef Lapid, the father of Yair Lapid, wrote an article asking the question, is there a danger that the IDF will seize the Shilton? What's the word? Seize power. So that was the atmosphere as we come closer to the Six-Day War. Now, we have problems on the Syrian border. You can see Eshkol here with David al-Azhar, General David al-Azhar, and Yitzhak Rabin visiting a village at kibbutz who was bombarded by the Syrians. One beforehand. No. Sorry. Okay, I'd like to just explain what happened. On the 7th of April, 1967, with his position in the people at the, as I say, at the lowest ebb, Levi Eshkol allows the Air Force to attack on the Friday, 7th of April, 1967, Syria. And it was a big incident, developed into a big incident. Actually, the impression was that Israel has decided to topple the extreme regime in Syria, which was backed by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet, at a certain point, decided to send a message to Nasser. Nasser, the Israelis are about to attack Syria, take on Syria. And we ask you to do something on your side, because Syria and Egypt had a pact of an agreement, a defense pact. Any one of them is attacked, then the other one will come to his rescue, and they said that the Israelis were massing forces in order to invade Syrian territory, and it wasn't true. It was actually a false report, but it drove Nasser into deciding to send the okay. Now, as Nasser decides to move his troops into the Sinai, he does it with the television. There was already television at that time, and his army marched through the streets of Cairo, and it became like a parade. And the people were frantic. I mean, it turned into an ecstasy. We are going to free Palestine. Because the army is moving. Now, it wasn't the intention, we suppose, of Nasser that it would deteriorate into war. But the reaction, not only in Cairo, but in all the Arab world, was such that the expectation of him were enormous, very high. As you can see, the pictures and all the caricatures, you know, in the radio and all sorts of. Here, we're going to do away with Israel. Now, in the interim, in between, Rabin goes to visit, goes on a visit to Iran. And there, the request of the Iranians, at that time, our relations with Iran, of course, were very, 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 very deep. Cooperation, intelligence, and 85% of the oil came from Iran. And the Shah is planning please do something to draw back the Egyptian army from southern Arabia, Yemen. They were afraid that all these ideas of uniting the Arab world will reach their country. So this is an episode which I found what made war inevitable was the decision of Nasser to close the Straits of Tiran, the Israeli shipping. And at that point, a crisis developed between the army, between the military and the civil authorities. Eshkol didn't want war, and his government decided that he must do anything to avoid the war. But the situation was such that the army was saying that we have. Remember I showed you on the first picture the boundaries of Israel as they were until 1967. The danger was that if indeed the Arab armies, and they all started to mobilize, if they attack simultaneously the state of Israel, then we will be in a crucial, critical situation where we can lose parts of our country, not to say that, not even to think about the possibility, of course, of destroying the country. So the army was saying, we must preempt. We must be the right to attack. And the closing of the Tiran Straits were actually the point of no return, the point that meant it is war. Eshkol tried to avoid war, and Abba Eban was sent to Washington to meet President Johnson. President Johnson didn't want war, and he actually said Israel will not very long unless it decides to go long, which meant if you start a war, then you are on your own. And this was, of course, very worrying. On the one hand, the army said, we must take the initiative. We must preempt. If we don't start the war, the other side will start the war, and we will be in a critical situation, a very, very dangerous situation. And Eshkol, as I said, finds himself in a very, very serious situation where he has to find the way, on the one hand, to get the Americans to support us, support Israel, to satisfy he understands, of course, that any minute, any waiting might be disastrous. There were hawks and doves in government. Eshkol was in between. He was neither hawk nor dove. The hawks, which were a minority in the government, wanted to let the army loose, to give the order to the army to act. The majority were the doves in the government. It wasn't the case of the army. Okay, what finally gets the government to accept and order the army to act, to attack, was what happened with the king, the little king. Do you remember? In November 66, when the IDF attacked that village in Jordan, and he had, at that time, he had very secret links with Israel, and he saw it, he saw the IDF attack at that time as treason. So now he decided to join Nasser, and now, of course, all the borders of Israel, where we were, the government, the army, all accepted the fact that if we continue to wait, then we will find ourselves with Iraqi forces and with Saudi forces on an eastern front and within the city of Jerusalem, which was divided, and the situation could be very, very critical. So as I say, the order to attack, before that, the government of national unity sworn by Eshkol, Menachem Begin, and Yosef Sapir of Gahar, the opposition, they joined the national unity government, and the story of the war, of course, is well known to you. I don't want to go into it. It's the military, the swiftest, and it's maybe one of the, maybe the most successful war campaign in the history of wars. In 6 days, Israel more than tripled its territory. You can see the Sinai, the West Bank, and of course the Golan Heights were under Israeli control. After a swift war, it changed the strategic situation altogether. But of course, caused us some problems that we have until today. Last, Levi Eshkol felt very bad. Of course, he was glad of the great victory. But he felt that he was robbed. I mean, the glory was robbed by Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan joined the National Unity Government 4 days before the war. He became the big hero of the war, although he actually didn't do anything. He was in office, and the one who saw to it that the army would get all the material, all the equipment that it needs was Levi Eshkol as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. So we felt very bad about it. What he said on the day as the war ended, he went to there was a session of the government. Of course, everybody was elated. And he went out to the journalists, would assemble them, to hear what he had to say. And he went out to the journalists with his fingers like this. And everyone was clapping him and saying, oh, yeah, it's victory, it's churches, you know.
The V.
And he said, no, you don't understand. This is not be a victory. This is wie kriegt men a voice, which means in Yiddish, how do we get out of it? So it was just too much. Okay, I'm sorry. I know that I didn't speak very fluently and very, but I hope that you got the idea. So thank you very much. It was a successful attempt to speak, but I tried. I made